Welcome to Module 4 Presentation number 2 in Special Ed 625. In this presentation, we will be talking about assistive technology and additional considerations on the IEP. Assistive technology. When we think of assistive technology, we generally are talking about improving function. The function stays essentially the same, but we are thinking about supporting the function. In the world of disabilities, it can be all kinds of function: driving, doing laundry, cutting meat, etc. In schools, we may think about these things especially during transition IEPs. We also are often thinking about instructional supports, the function within the general ed curriculum in a standards-based instruction. Thinking of assistive technology, if you haven't already, please watch the AT examples video and the SET framework video. Depending on where you're at in your program, you may have already completed the SET framework video in a different course. The AT examples video gives wonderful examples of things that you could include on your IEPs. Definitely keep it as a resource. I also want you to think about how what you learned confirmed or changed your perceptions of providing assistive technology for students receiving special education services. This would be a nice piece to add to your discussion forum this week, if you wish. So what is the SET framework? It is a decision-making tool specifically designed to use during IEP meetings. The steps include S for the student. And you would think about the student's disability, the student's age. E is for environment. What environment are we thinking about for the assistive technology? T is for the tasks. What tasks are being completed? And tools. What tools would be most beneficial given the situation? Ideas about task. So what does the student need to do? Do they need to write a paper? Do they need to be able to read? Do they need to be able to eat during lunch? What does the student need to be an active participant? So let's think about the musical chairs example. So if we all are familiar with musical chairs, so we might have 12 chairs around a circle and we play some music. And the first idea is that all of the students are able-bodied and can do it with no accommodation. But what if we add a student who is deaf to the situation? Can that student take part? So the student needs to be able to go around the circle listening to music and stop when the music stops. So what do we need to give that student who's deaf to be able to be an active participant? We could provide a lighting mechanism so that every time the music is on, a light is on, and that student would be able to take part because now the student sees when the music is on. What if the student is in a wheelchair? Could we still play and go around the circle and the student in the wheelchair would be going as well? We can't if the chairs are all there. But we could put mats on the floor, colored mats. All students get to be involved, and all we did was provide an accommodation in order to do that. It's similar to that idea, if any of you have ever seen the cartoon, of the custodian after a big snowstorm who's shoveling the steps into the school, and the ramp into the school is still full of snow. And the student in a wheelchair says to the custodian, "What are you doing?" And he says, "Well, I have to clear the steps for the students to get in." And the student in the wheelchair says, "If you clear the ramp, all students can enter the school." And I love that image because it is exactly correct. Although that ramp is there because of somebody in a wheelchair, anyone can access the school through that ramp. Other things we need to think about when we think of the task. We want to think of the language component, the cognitive component, the motor component, and the social component. So if you think about that AT examples video, that hit on all 4 of these areas. Some goals of assistive technology. This is a summary from everything you've learned. We want to increase their participation and achievement to be as close to grade level standards as possible. We want to provide the least complex intervention that will lower barriers to achievement appropriately. We want to support the instruction whenever possible. We do not want to replace it. So on your IEPs, there's always a spot that says additional considerations. So these are 5 additional considerations that we need to think about. Is behavior going to impede the student's ability to progress? If so, we will need a behavior intervention plan, or we will need specific goals and accommodations, modifications, services, etc. for that student. Another consideration is limited English proficiency. There will always be a section on the IEP that you check and you provide additional information. Blind or visually impaired, deaf or hard of hearing, those are also additional considerations. Communication needs. Does the student need a communication device? This will be a separate spot on the IEP, even though you may have it listed in the adaptation section. There will also be a part where you're considering different things that are necessary for the student. And finally, assistive technology is also in this section. Extended school year. ESY may be required as a related service. At a minimum, ESY must be considered. ESY is anything that extends beyond the normal school year. So this could include summer, which is the most common. It could include weekends, or it might mean an hour or 2 extra each day, depending on the child's needs. It is an IEP team decision. One example of this, as we think about an extended day versus a summer program, we had a student who did not receive speech and language services. It was a student new to the district. The case manager who took the student in failed to notice that the student required speech. So for several months, the student did not receive any of the speech services identified in the IEP. That meant we owed the student about 150 hours of speech time. So what we did is we offered 1 day a week where the student would stay after school, and we would provide speech services, and we would also provide busing home. So that's how it might look. Sometimes we might do it on a weekend, but I would say that that's the most rare. And again, summer is the most common. A reminder, this is an IEP team decision. There might be moments where evening is appropriate because we're trying to work with a student who's blind, visually impaired, and helping that student navigate at a different time of day rather than only during the school day. Other components to consider. We have to decide, is there regression or recoupment issues? So the team has to talk about, will there be significant regression over time? You might not know that exactly, but you need to have that conversation. If you know that after Christmas break, the student is behind or has regressed, that gives you data to say, yes, the student probably needs extended school year. You also want to think about, can they recoup the skills at the same level and at the same rate as their peers? So those are a few of the two of the pieces you have to talk about. You also have to talk about self-sufficiency. There are self-sufficiency checklists or assessments that may indicate the student needs instruction during extended time to attain or maintain functional skills. The other piece you talk about is the student's unique needs. For example, a student may need mobility instruction after dark in the community because of a certain visual impairment. Remember, every IEP team must address whether or not ESY is required. And it is very common if you have an IEP that has an annual due date of October, you're not going to know the ESY decision yet. So it might be that in March you make that decision and you update the IEP at that time. Finally, I'd like you to use this guide to determine, are there pieces in here that you want to use in your toolbox. This guide is available on Moodle. Thank you and have a blessed day.